Good afternoon, dear conference participants, both here in Munich's Amerika-haus and on YouTube around the globe. On behalf of the board of the Bavarian American Academy, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Bavarian American Academy's 23rd International Conference on Labor, Unions, and the Future of Work. This is our opening talk and podium discussion. It's titled Art, Activism, and Memorializing the Triangle Fire Memorial in New York City. And this is with our distinguished guest, Professor Anne Trasciatti. As many of you may know, in October 2023, New York City dedicated its first labor memorial. The Triangle Fire Memorial honors 146 workers, most of them young Italian and Jewish immigrant women, some as young as 14 years old, who died in a garment factory fire in Greenwich Village in 1911. The Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition put in a huge amount of effort and dedication and to install a quite beautiful memorial on the building where the fire happened. And we'll have a chance to discuss both the work of labor activists, organizers, artists, and everyone who cared with Anne in a minute. Anne Trasciatti is Director of Labor Studies and Professor of Rhetoric at Hofstra University, and she's also President of the Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition. Her recent books include 2 edited anthologies. The first is called Talking to the Girls, Intimate and Political Essays on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, came out in 2022. And the second, Where Are the Workers? Labor Stories at Museums and Historical Sites, also from 2022. She's now completing a book on the civil liberties activism on Irish-American labor organizer Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. For over a decade, Anne has helped organize the annual official Triangle Fire commemoration. She led the project to build the Triangle Fire Memorial, dedicated on October 11, 2023. It is the first labor memorial and one of only a handful of monuments to women in New York City. Before I ask you to welcome our guest, let me add that there will be a short Q&A after Anne's presentation and our conversation. The Q&A is open to our YouTube audience, as well as, of course, you here with me. And the YouTube audience can get their questions to us via Slido. Please check the website or the YouTube website channel. Let me also add that both keynotes by Colin Crouch later today at 6 and Shirley Lincoln's keynote tomorrow at 4 will also be available via YouTube live stream. But for now, join me in welcoming Anne Trasciatti. Anne, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for that gracious applause. Thank you to BAA, to Kirsten Schmidt, Christoph Straub, Yasmin Falk. Also to a mutual friend that Kirsten and I share, Sherry Kane, who connected us. Sherry is a fantastic labor organizer in New York and also a founding member of Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition, and to everyone who worked in any and every capacity, from the refreshments, the tech, everything, to make this happen, because you are, of course, the most important people here, because without you, we would not be here. So my name is Anne Trasciatti. I direct the Labor Studies program at Hofstra University, and I am the president of Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition, and I am happy to be speaking with you here about the past of work and how we commemorate that past as a way to chart a more positive path forward for the future of work, not just in the US, but around the world, because Triangle is a story that resonates around the globe. As Kirsten mentioned, I was the project leader for the Triangle Fire Memorial, but this was a real group effort. No one, and I mean no one, does a project like this alone. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you what the memorial looks like, how it works, how we built it, and how it is transforming the Brown Building, which used to be called the Ash Building when the fire happened. It is now the Brown Building, into an active memory site, a place to reflect on the past and to be inspired to action in the present. But first, a little bit more information about the fire. Let me just ask you, how many people in here know the story of the Triangle Fire? Okay, pretty good. If you know anything about U.S. labor history, typically this is the story that you know. Well, this was a transformative moment in the history of the city of New York and in the nation, and actually with global implications. So let me give you a little bit of information about that moment. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, or the Triangle Waist Factory as it was known at the time, made fashionable women's blouses. New York City was a center of manufacture for women's clothing in the early 20th century. And those fashionable, crisp, tailored blouses were a very desirable item of clothing for all women because they were so stylish. Triangle employed about 500 workers, most of them immigrants, a majority of them women, and Italian and Jewish immigrant women, some of them in the U.S. for less than a year. It was owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who were themselves immigrants, Jewish immigrants. They were known as the Shirtwaist Kings. The factory existed on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Brown Building, which was a loft building in New York. You can see that here. And the fire happened at just about closing time, or maybe 15 minutes before closing time, on a Saturday in early spring, March 25th, 1911. It lasted only 15 minutes, but because there were minimal fire safety precautions, no fire drills, the doors opened inwards, insufficient number of exits, and perhaps most importantly, doors locked. Blank and Harris were known to lock their workers in. They said it was to prevent theft, but it was almost certainly to keep out union organizers because Triangle was not a union shop, despite efforts to organize it. So even though the fire lasted about 15 minutes, and we think it was caused by a worker smoking a cigarette, they weren't allowed to go out for cigarette breaks. And that ash from the cigarette, a live ash, probably fell into a barrel of cloth scraps, and it just ignited literally the air on fire because there were so many fibers and the workers were packed so close together. Because they could not get out on the 9th floor, workers on the 8th and 10th floors were able to get out because the 8th floor is where the fire happened. They called up to the 10th. Those workers got out over the roof. NYU law students in the next door building helped them. The workers on the 8th floor got out down the elevator and through the exit that was working. The workers on the 9th floor never got the call, and by the time they found out about the fire, it was too late for many of them. They rushed to the doors, they opened inwards. Imagine you're trying to get out of a burning building and you have to actually step back into the onrushing fire before you can open the door, so they panicked. A barrel of oil exploded in front of the one door that was available to them. The elevator stopped working. The fire escape collapsed, impaling at least one worker and killing people who tried to escape out of it, and the other door was locked. So they turned to the windows. On the 9th floor, they looked out, and although the fire department came very quickly, the ladders only went up to the 6th floor, and so that was also an escape that was closed to them. And as a result, 146 of those 500 or so workers died that day, 60 of whom jumped out the window. And you might wonder at the folly of jumping out of the 9th floor of a building. Well, they thought they might be caught by the nets of the firemen that were held out for them to jump into, but they weren't. They crushed through the nets. And it just seemed like it was worth a chance rather than to face certain death by remaining inside the building. So 146 workers, many of them 14 years old, the same age as the workers that Kirsten was telling us about that are now working in unsafe conditions, again in the U.S., died that day. There was a trial. The owners were acquitted. They were not able, the prosecution was not able to convince the jury that the owners knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that the doors were locked, although they did. And they ended up making money on the event. What their insurance company paid to them was more than what they ultimately, through civil lawsuits, were forced to pay per worker who died to the families. So this was a money-making event for them. It's an awful story, but it's not just an awful story. There was a positive twist at the end. Workers were angry, they were furious, they were appalled, and they began stepping up their organizing efforts. Workers who resisted unionizing, particularly Italian women, realized that unions actually might be the key to their salvation in the workplace. Suffragists were inspired by what happened to the girls at Triangle to push harder for the right to vote. There was a general strike in New York a couple of years after the fire in the industry. Politicians were inspired to do better by the citizenry. There was a factory investigating commission that went around the state and reported on conditions, and New York became a leader in fire safety laws and child labor laws. And in fact, the closest thing the US has ever had to social democracy, by that I mean the New Deal, was inspired by the Triangle Fire. The Secretary of Labor under Franklin Roosevelt, Frances Perkins, the first female cabinet member in US history, said in 1961, the New Deal began on March 25th, 1911. She had witnessed the fire. She was one of those who inspected factories around the state after that and pushed for a number of reforms and radical changes to labor laws and to things like, creating Social Security, workers' compensation, strengthening workers' compensation, et cetera, because of what she and others in New York City witnessed on March 25th, 1911. After the fire, there was a question about whether this would be one of those incidents that would, tear people apart for a moment and then go away. And a very famous illustrator, Thomas Aloysius Dorgan, an Irish-American illustrator, published this very moving illustration in a local newspaper. And in fact, the Triangle Fire has not been forgotten. It wasn't forgotten then, and it isn't forgotten now. Workers marched past the Brown Building on May Day, and I should tell you that the building was state-of-the-art and fireproof. Of course, the people inside were not. And when it was renovated after the fire, it was renamed the Brown Building and donated by Mr. Brown to New York University. So May Day marches went by the Brown Building, suffrage parades went by the Brown Building, unions taught their members about the fire, especially the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. My mom was a garment worker, not in New York, in Pennsylvania, and a proud member of the ILGWU, and she told me when I began doing this work that she and the other workers in her factory knew they were safe, and this is a verbatim quote, "We knew we were safe because of what happened to those poor girls at Triangle." So the unions didn't forget. And since the 1980s, New Yorkers haven't forgotten. Every year, on or about March 25th, there is a commemoration in front of the building. But for over a century, on other days, it was quite possible to walk past this building. This is the Brown Building today, where the fire happened, and not realize it. I don't know if you can see, there are 3 small plaques on the building on that bottom corner, but no one sees them, literally, no one sees them. I have been standing with my husband in front of the building and had people come up to us saying, "Do you know where the Triangle Building is?" So it was quite possible to walk past, knowing that somewhere there was this important building, but not quite able to figure out which building it was. So remember, the Triangle Fire Coalition decided that we wanted to change that. The coalition was founded in 2008 with 2 goals. The first was to help organize the official centennial commemoration of the fire, along with labor unions, the fire department of the city of New York, educational institutions, Italian-American organizations, Jewish-American organizations, safety organizations, et cetera. It's academics, activists, artists of all kinds. So we wanted to make the centennial commemoration into something really special and to connect people around New York City, New York State, the US, and the world who wanted to participate in some way. And this is essentially what we did. You might recognize this image on the left. That is the shirtwaist procession that marched from Union Square to the Brown Building on the anniversary of the fire in 2011. We made those shirtwaists, each one of them representing what the girls and young women at Triangle made, and each one of them bearing a sash with the names and ages of someone who died in the fire, so that these are not abstractions. These are all individuals who had a life and who should be remembered for their having, a rich and full life, as well as for the tragic way in which they died. Also, the young girl on the right, I'm really honored to say, is my daughter. who marched in that centennial procession. So that's one of the things we did. We also helped to recruit young children and others to come and say the names of the workers who died and to lie a flower down in front of the building. And one of the things that has become a tradition of triangle commemorations, which we did not organize, but we really helped to publicize, was the raising of the ladder up to the 6th floor by the fire department, so people can see the gap between where the workers were trapped on the 9th floor and where the ladders of the fire department, by law, were only required to reach. So in a city of skyscrapers, the fire department ladders only had to reach up to the 6th floor. So all of these things, the shirtwaist, the laying of flowers, the raising of the ladder, have become iconic aspects of Triangle Fire commemoration. And so the centennial commemoration was quite well attended. It was quite a success. And that our success with that helped us to move forward then with the second goal for which the coalition was founded. And that was to build a permanent memorial to honor those who died in the fire, to recall the social and political movements organized or galvanized by their deaths, and to inspire people to action in the present. And I'm proud to say that we succeeded at that goal as well. And it was our success with the centennial that laid the foundation for our success with the memorial. So for the next few minutes now, I'd like to introduce you to the memorial, if you haven't yet seen it, and explain a little bit about how it works. So here's the general scheme. You can see, and I'm going to stay by the mic because I know this is being live streamed, but I'm a bit of a mover when I talk, so I'm feeling a little constrained. So bear with me if I feel like I'm jumping out, if I look like I'm jumping out of my skin. I am. Okay. So it's what you're seeing in front of you is essentially a steel ribbon that cascades down the corner of the building. That's the corner of Washington Place and Green Street. So it cascades from the 9th floor, right? And the reason it starts there is because we wanted people's attention to be called up to the part of the building where most of the workers who died were trapped. So this gives the memorial scale, right? So it cascades down from the 9th floor, and then it splits about 12 feet above the ground. And then there's a horizontal, right, 2 horizontal panels. And etched into those panels, which you will see a close-up in a minute, are the names and ages of all the workers who died in the fire. So it goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then it comes around like this. And the story of the fire is inscribed on the inside of the parts of the steel ribbon that come down, again, that are vertical. And then, on the bottom, there is a stone glass reflective panel. And that stone glass reflective panel is at about at waist height. And when you look in that stone glass reflective panel, think of basically stone that has the shine of glass, hence stone glass. When you look, you see the names, and they look as if they're floating on air, right? Because the light, remember I said they're stenciled in, the light comes through the steel and reflects. Let me show you. So here's the fire on the left. You can see the scheme in the middle, and then what you see on the right is it's a rendering of what you would see if you stood right below the corner of Washington and Green, and you can see that a little bit more closely. And if you look, you might say, well, Marianne, that's supposed to be stainless steel, but it looks like a quilt, right? It looks like it's got etching on it. Well, in fact, you would be right. When the memorial was designed, and the designers are a 2-person team, Richard Juniu and Uri Wegman, and I will tell you a little bit about how the design was chosen in a few minutes. But when Richard and Uri designed the memorial, their initial thought was that it would just be stainless steel that kind of bended like cloth, that looked like a ribbon, right? Because these were garment workers. Then they realized that the ribbon, the steel itself should suggest cloth in a deeper, more profound way. And so they had this really terrific idea called the collective ribbon. And what that is in 2019, remember the Triangle Fire Coalition, in partnership with the designers of the memorial, Richard and Uri, sent an invitation out. And that invitation basically asked people from anywhere in the world, and it was translated into Italian, Bangla, and I think other languages as well. I can't remember which ones. Bangla, because so much of the garment industry now is in Bangladesh. Italian, because Italians are very interested in this story. It's very connected to International Women's Day, especially in Italy and elsewhere. We invited people to submit cloth. If you felt a connection to this story, send us a piece of cloth, or bring a piece of cloth on the weekend of March 16th, 2019, to the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, and we will sew your cloth and make a ribbon collectively. And then the idea was to take a drone and to scan the image of that long, long ribbon and then imprint it on the steel. So essentially what this did was it got the community, a community of sewers together, to sew a cloth that then would give texture to the memorial, all right? So involving the community. Here's what it looked like that day. The pieces were spread out on really long tables, and then those pieces were sewed together, and then this is archived now at Cornell University. I think it's at Cornell. Don't hold me to that live stream. Then we have this really long ribbon that people from all over the world made. And everyone who submitted a piece of cloth or brought a piece of cloth also gave us the story of why they did so. And these are all archived as well. And if you look at this image, you can see what we were going for here. The left is the Collective Ribbon Project. The right is a garment factory in the early 20th century. I've had people tell me that the experience of sewing the collective ribbon was one of the most profoundly moving experiences they had ever had as an activist. We had people submit union logos. We had people submit underpanties. We had people submit, I submitted a linen napkin that my dad got when he was stationed in Germany during the Korean conflict and sent home to my mother, who was a garment worker. So people submitted things that are really dear to them that had some sort of connection to garment work or union organizing or immigrant rights organizing. And now, when they go to the memorial, they can look and say, oh, I made that. My great-grandmother's, napkin is there. My aunt's underwear are in there, right? And so it belongs to them. So here's a close-up of what that texture looked like. And so here's that names panel that I was telling you about. The names and the ages of the workers are there. We made a very deliberate decision to include the ages because the oldest worker to die in the fire was 43 and the youngest were 14. And we thought people should know that in 1911, 14-year-olds died in a fire because the bosses valued profits over people and locked them in. We also made a decision to include with married women their birth names as well as their married names so that people could see that there were several pairs of sisters who worked together and died together in the fire and get a sense of the immense impact that this had on families. There was a mother-son, there were multiple sisters. One family lost a mom and two sisters. All the women, the Maltese family, all the women in their family were wiped out on that day. So the way we named the names helps to tell the story. We collaborated with Esther Licata, who is an Italian activist who wrote the first ever book on the Triangle Fire in Italy. She collected all of the birth certificates of the Italians. It's a little harder to do that with the Jewish immigrants for obvious reasons. But so this was really a transnational effort to update the names with input from the family members to make sure we got the ages, and we're really proud of that. The inscription on the side that I mentioned to you, the memorial does this, right, was written by Kevin Baker, who is an acclaimed novelist, historical fiction, and also nonfiction writer and a member of our board. And it reads, on the afternoon of March 25th, 1911, 146 workers at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory died here in the space of 15 minutes. Most of them were immigrants or the children of immigrants. Nearly all of them were women or girls. They died from smoke and fire, huddled under the workbenches, or trying to break down the doors the factory owners had locked against them. They died leaping from the windows on the 9th floor, falling so hard they smashed through the sidewalk beneath your feet. They died trying to save one another. They died from the cruel indifference of their bosses and from the negligence of city authorities. They died with their sisters, their mothers, their daughters, their brothers, but they did not die in vain. Their deaths inspired a renewed fight for social justice, a struggle for worker rights and safety that would transform America. This memorial inscribes the names of those who died on that long ago afternoon and honors their memory. But it is also dedicated to the survivors and the witnesses and to all those who took up the fight for basic human dignity in the workplace and those who do so to this day. Please remember that last line because we're going to come back to it again, those who do so to this day. This is the other side, on the Green Street side. It is the same inscription translated into Italian and Yiddish, the languages that would have been familiar to the Triangle workers, by Margarita Kripex and David Goldberg. And to the best of my knowledge and the coalition's knowledge, this is the first monument in the United States, the first trilingual monument, and the first and only monument in Yiddish, Italian, and English. This is the reflecting panel, that stone glass panel at waist height that you look at. And so this is an ambulatory memorial, right? You have to read it by walking, and you see all those names. What you also see, so you see the names reflected kind of floating there, and then engraved in the stone glass, you see testimony from eyewitnesses, Triangle workers, William Gunn Shepard, a young journalist for the Associated Press who saw the fire and reported an eyewitness account that reverberated around the country. Frances Perkins, who went on to become the first female Secretary of Labor, first female cabinet member. Everyone who gave some sort of comment or who commented and whose comment we used was identified by their job, no matter how humble. If they were a cutter, if they were, a machine operator, whatever it is, we gave dignity to all the workers, everyone from Secretary of Labor down to the most unskilled factory worker at Triangle that day. This is people interacting with the memorial. The gentleman in the wheelchair is this Serf Maltese, a former U.S. Senator. He is the one whose family lost all its women that day in the fire. You could see. So we have these little pinchers on that metal piece, right, where the stone glass stops. And they're actually to keep skateboarders. I don't know if you have any skaters in here, but we didn't want skaters grinding on the memorial. And essentially what grinding is you jump up and you kind of ride the bottom, the flat part of your board along an edge. And so we put these pinchers in to keep skateboarders from grinding. And my two skater sons were the skateboard advisors to the memorial project and said, yeah, no, can't grind this. But what we didn't expect when Richard and Uri put those in is that they're great flower holders. So every year now, people come and put flowers in there on the anniversary of the fire, but also anytime people come, they can come and pay their respects, and people do come all the time and leave a flower. So there's almost no one who's going to go on record saying that the Triangle story isn't important enough to warrant public recognition. Like, nobody in New York City said that to us, right? Or anywhere. I've never talked to anyone who said, what the heck are you doing that for? But nonetheless, it was not an easy task to build a memorial in New York City, especially when you're an organization with no powerful entity, meaning rich entity behind you, bankrolling your effort. It's especially hard when you're building a memorial to mostly female immigrant workers who died because their bosses cared more about profits than people, in a city where money talks. I love my home city, but let's face it, money talks. Public monuments overwhelmingly recognize powerful men, usually military leaders or political leaders, and the stories of the struggles of working class people largely go untold. The U.S. is terrible at telling labor history. I don't know how you are here, but you can't be worse than how we are. It's not a story that's easily co-opted. It's a story that people resist telling, that powerful people resist telling. And that's not an accident, right? And so it's really hard. People do not line up to fund labor memorials. And we're not the first entity that tried to build one, but we're the first entity that succeeded. So how did we succeed? I just want to give you a brief summary of how we succeeded, because I think it's important in this moment. And we succeeded basically because we organized. We told a story that was really compelling, and we organized and built solidarity, referring back to one of those important values, right? So this was a project built on organizing, solidarity, and a powerful story about working people and how important they are, and how our lives are as good as they are, to the extent that they are good, because of their struggles and their sacrifices, often unwilling sacrifices. So the first thing we did was to develop deep ties to the community. We built strong relationships with labor, city government, community organizations, religious groups, journalists, preservationists, academics, activists, you name it. We brought them in. And our vision for this project was a community vision. In the ramp-up to the 100th anniversary of the fire, we met with individuals and groups who had a strong connection to that event, who felt that that story moved them in some way. Firefighters, safety workers, garment workers, Triangle family members, Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we had conversations with them and said, so if we were to build a memorial, what would you want it to look like? And they told us. They said, we want it to tell the story. We would want it to tell the story of the fire. We'd want it to have the names and the ages, and we want it to be on the building. That's a sacred spot, and we want it marked that way. And these community ties and these asks shaped this project at every stage. We nurtured these ties by participating in the labor parade, by giving public lectures, by working with school kids at every turn. We also sought legitimacy and expertise whenever we needed to and whenever we could. This is an all-volunteer organization. I've not earned a penny from this project, nor has pretty much anyone else on the board. And people respected our commitment because of that. But they're not going to cut big checks to you because they respect your moxie as an all-volunteer organization. They want to see some responsibility. So we incorporated as a 501c3 to build trust so that people would basically give us large checks. We forged a relationship with New York University, the owner of the building. It's a really, really compelling public-private initiative. And they remain an active participant in this project. They are essentially the hosts of the Triangle Fire Memorial. The building is a science building right now. So instead of garment workers on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors, they're genetics labs up there. So you see graduate students working away at the tables. And the university now feels connected to the story, as do many of its students. And we signed a memorandum of agreement, a legal document binding us together to be able to get this project done. We also talked to other people who have built similar kinds of structures, memorials to tragic events, compelling events, and asked them, how'd you do it? In particular, we had a great conversation with the people who ran the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Project. And they essentially said, yeah, you can't get involved in choosing the design. It has to be done professionally. You have to hire a competition director, and you have to assemble a stellar jury so that you are above reproach. So that's what we did. We hired a competition director, Ernesto Martinez, a trained architect, and in January of 2013, we launched an international design competition with jury members from the fields of public art, fashion, design, labor history, architecture. We got 176 entries from over 30 countries, and the winning design team was from New York City, Queens, the borough of my birth, Richard Junyu and Uri Wegman. Then we assembled a build team, expertise, right? Lead architect, project manager, fabricator, graphic designer. And the graphic designer, in collaboration with the designers of the memorial, gave us a brilliant idea. The font that you saw on the memorial was designed by a woman. It's Kula, and it was designed by Erin McLaughlin. And we thought, this is a memorial largely to the struggles of women, women workers, and we wanted to pay homage to those workers, so that's why we translated the story, and that's why we chose a woman-designed font. So this memorial has an interesting history. In addition to the history it commemorates, its own history is, we think, interesting. And then we hammered away at fundraising. As I said, like, corporate donors do not line up to fund labor memorials. So we had to really be creative here. The initial capital budget for this memorial was $1.5 million. The New York Times, a friend of ours, a reporter, got us the attention of then Governor Andrew Cuomo. I'm going to tell you, I'm not a big fan, sorry, live stream. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Cuomo, but he did right by this project. When he learned about the project, he essentially cut us a check for the whole capital budget. But of course, as projects like this do, the costs increased. There were some structural issues with the building because it was built in turn of the last century, made the cost of the memorial go up, and so ultimately, by the time everything was done, this cost $2.9 million. $250,000 of that was a check we had to cut to NYU to hold on to invest, so that if the memorial needs repairs or cleaning, or if it's vandalized in any way, they will take care of it. But the rest really just went to fund the building, the permits, everything else that you saw. Again, it's not a lot of money for a memorial, but it's a lot of money for a group of volunteers. But our friends came through. In addition to New York State, unions, foundations, safety professionals, elected officials, fashion companies, a few, the ones that have good labor practices, and good-hearted people helped us make up the difference. And the final thing we did was to keep our eyes on the prize. This project took 14 years. Well, if you count from the time the fire happened, it actually took 112 years. And it was delayed by Superstorm Sandy, was delayed by structural issues with the Brown building, it was delayed by COVID, and there were bureaucratic hurdles. New York City has a ton of bureaucracy, especially when a building is landmarked, as Triangle is, especially when it's privately owned, as the building is. But we did it. We navigated all the bureaucracies of New York. The memorial was dedicated on October 11, 2023. It was not quite finished when it was dedicated. The complexity of the fabrication process meant it took a little bit longer than we thought, but we had a great ceremony. And in March of 2025, we had the first commemoration with the memorial installed on the building. And now, in addition to the iconic shirtwaist that grace the front of your program, our program, we now have the corner of Washington in green as another iconic representation of this history. So now the memorial is doing its work, right? Here it is at the commemoration. You can see people laying flowers, and you can see how beautiful that looks, right? But the memorial is doing its work not just on March 25th. It's doing its work all year. People in the neighborhood visit it, tourists to New York visit it, students visit it on school trips, workers visit it, union organizers visit it. This is Kalpona Akhtar. She is a fantastic labor organizer from Bangladesh. She started working in the garment industry when she was a teenager, and she was instrumental in bringing our attention to the companies who tried to hide after the collapse at Rana Plaza and say, "Ooh, we didn't know our clothes were being outsourced there." She actually went through the rubble and took photos of the labels of the companies that were manufacturing their clothing there so that they couldn't hide anymore. And she has visited the memorial. She helped us observe the 100-year anniversary of the fire. She's a stalwart partner of the work that we do. A Jane's Walk was held there. This is basically a walk held in honor of, I'm having a senior moment, Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs, the iconoclastic urban planner who really did a lot to develop our understanding of what makes neighborhoods livable and wonderful. And in her honor, New York City hosts Jane, because she was from New York City, hosts Jane's Walks all over the city where people get acquainted with their neighborhood. There's a Jane's Walk now at the Triangle Fire Memorial. And on May 31st of this year, women workers who worked for Nike came. They were doing a tour of the U.S. It started in Oregon, where Nike headquarters are, then it went to New York, and one thing that they wanted to make sure that they visited was the Triangle Fire Memorial. These are Indonesian workers. And this is a project or an initiative that is supported by the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, Global Labor Justice, Jobs with Justice, and et cetera, demanding that Nike pay them living wages and provide better working conditions. This company that makes extraordinary profits and always talks about what it does for women in its advertising, essentially treats its women workers around the globe as if they are insignificant and invisible. And so that last line of the inscription that says, "This memorial is for you," when it was read to these workers, they were moved to tears and said, "This is our memorial. We want to teach this story. We want to share this story. We think everyone should come here because we are them and they are us." So the coalition has been recognized by the Workers' Compensation Board of New York, the Tour Guides of New York City, the Public Design Commission, Village Preservation, politicians, et cetera, et cetera. But it's workers' inspiration that is our greatest reward. And you should visit the Triangle Memorial if you haven't already. Everyone should visit the Triangle Memorial because the threats against the good things that this tragedy inspired are now greater than ever. As we heard from Kirsten's talk, child labor is back, okay? And that's not a good thing. But like they did over 100 years ago, government leaders and ordinary people have the power to push back against those threats, and they are. The fight is on in New York and elsewhere around the country. Child labor is not the future of work, nor is exploitation, nor is unsafe workplaces or any of the things that mark Triangle. Our dream is for the Triangle Memorial to inspire people who visit it to join that fight with us and to stay with that fight until we get the world that we deserve. And these workers are committed to it, and I hope that you are too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is, above all else, I hope you saw that, it is a very beautiful memorial. It's not figurative, but it is beautiful. And the other topic that I would like to talk to you about is, it is also very performative. Like the Vietnam's Veterans Memorial, you always see people who will go down, who will take a piece of paper and make sure that they copy the name. Could you talk a little bit about the practice of memorializing and in terms of performance? Not that you look at something, but that the memorial engages you. And if it fails to, there's no memorializing.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we weren't the first organization or entity to try to build a memorial, but we're the first ones to succeed. And I'm really glad that we were, because most of the memorials that were proposed, actually all of the memorials that were proposed before ours were not of this kind. They were plaques on a building where you look and say, oh, okay, here are all the people who died, which is important, right? But they weren't the kinds of things that would draw you in. And why Richard and Uri's design was chosen, not by the coalition, but by the jury, was because it did exactly that, right? One of the things that it drew you in, one of the things that that they wanted to replicate in their design was the act of looking up and looking down, which I didn't mention here, but on March 25th, 1911, when people heard the cries at the building and smelled the smoke and heard the fire engines, they rushed to the site, Francis Perkins among them, William Gunn Shepherd, the reporter, but ordinary New Yorkers too. And what they did was they looked up, saw the fire, saw the girls on the ledge of the 9th floor. Many of them yelled, "Don't jump, don't jump." And then when the girls jumped, they looked down. Mm-hmm. So the memorial invites you to do that. You look up to the 9th floor, and then you look down at the reflective panel, and you see the names. And to be able to read the quotes, then you have to move. You have to walk with it, right? So your whole body is engaged. You are basically vicariously witnessing what happened in 1911 in your own time, at your own pace, in a really, I think, compelling way.
I actually forgot a term, not just performing memorializing, but also embodying, because you see yourself reflected. So you're implicated and you can see yourself as part of that history. Do you have particular stories that you kind of, I'm not saying like best, but that were more, that kind of stuck in your mind? I remember the one by Rosie Wiener, for instance. Do you have like individual stories of the women that you kind of got to know in the process?
So it's interesting because one of my dearest friends, who I met through this project, who is my co-editor for Talking to the Girls, she teaches a class on the Triangle Fire at her university and hands out the names every year. Students have to pick a name, and the students get really connected to the person whose name they picked, and that happens. You start hearing the stories about 146 workers, right? That's such a, that's a big number. But when you start digging into the individual stories, you do feel attracted to them. So for me, there are two. One is the Mayali sisters. They were these Italian immigrant women, and they lived in the West Village, and they were young, 17 and 19, and I just imagine what it must have been like for them to work, as young Italian immigrant girls, like so many people I knew growing up, and members of my family, and to be in the factory together that day. So that one's really moves me. I should mention they're the first names that I chalked. Yeah. So Chalk is this participatory art project by Ruth Sergel, actually now a Berlin-based artist and filmmaker, and it's now carried out by the Tenement House Museum. She's passed it over after 20 years. But what Ruth has people do is, on the anniversary of the fire, you take a name and you chalk the name of that worker who died at Triangle in front of the place where they lived. And the first workers I ever chalked were the Mayali sisters. And so I just felt really connected to them. But the other was Israel Rosen and his mom, Julia Rosen. And Israel was 17, and his mom was in her 40s when she was 43, when they were both killed in the fire. And for the 100th anniversary of the fire, that shirtwaist procession, my 17-year-old son, Sam, held Israel's shirtwaist, and I held his mother's shirtwaist. So mother and son. And I'm going to cry right now. At several moments during the procession, I looked at my 17-year-old son and thought, my God, poor Julia Rosen, fearing for her own 17-year-old son. So, yeah.
So it seems, even though it is abstract, as you can see, it is still individualizing. So I'm wondering about those aspects that help or enable successful memorializing. And it seems to be performative aspect, individual aspect, and then also kind of a place-based aspect. I remember that myself. You struggled until you finally got the memorial up there, not elsewhere. And it was difficult to talk NYU into accepting it, right?
Yeah, I kind of skimmed over that part, but yes, yes, it was difficult to talk NYU into accepting it. So one of the board members and I, Joel Sosinski, and I started calling ourselves Charming and Delightful. We would go and be charming and delightful with NYU, and they would say no, and we would just make another appointment and go and see them again and be charming and delightful. But place really matters, yes, but narrative matters. You mentioned that at the beginning. The stories. The story of Triangle is really compelling. And one of the reasons it's so compelling is these were workers who they did what they were supposed to do. They came to the U.S., they worked hard, they kept their noses down, right? And they worked, and this was supposed to be the land of the dream. And this was supposed to work out well for them, and it didn't. And some of them were only 14. And I think that story, they weren't radicals. They weren't anarchists. They weren't socialists. There was no Communist Party then. But there's no way to red bait them, right, out of sympathy. You can't not feel for them. They went to work and never came home. And I think that's a powerful aspect of the story. And I know a lot of school teachers who teach this story, and their students really respond. We have this thing in the U.S. National History Day, and it's middle school students and high school students. They do history projects. I can't tell you how many from all around the country. They identify with these young people, and they say, wow, if I lived then, that would have been me. That helps also.
And another aspect that keeps comes to my mind is the one of repetition and of ritualizing. You have that every year. And also I was there at one of the ceremonies where the names were read aloud. So sound, I would add to kind of that mix for successful, effective memorializing, and also repetition. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, completely, yeah. I mean, that's what ritual is, right? If you do something once, it's an event, but if you do it continuously in a similar manner, it becomes a ritual. And it is now a ritual. People, and you show up on March 25th in front of the building, you see people you hug, you feel like you're bonded through this experience, and it's really powerful. And I have to say, too, that I've told this story, I can't even tell you how many times, to how many different audiences, and it always feels special every time. And I think there's something about the, you think maybe you'd get bored with it, but you never do. There's something about ritual that renews itself every time.
And it also, despite the good story, it needs artwork that is engaging. It needs that aspect of culture. You mentioned Frances Perkins, and you said that she said the New Deal began on March 25th, 1911. In which way or in which aspects is that true to you, or is that something, it sounds good, but in how far is it an apt consideration?
Oh, it's totally true. Yeah. I mean, her grandson, talked about how she had this wooden ladder in her, this rope and wooden ladder in her home, and she would use it to, right, this moved her so deeply, and what this personal, experience that she had, what it did then was to turn her, towards advocating for workers for the rest of her life. And when she went in, when FDR gave her the call and said, I want to talk to you about this position, she went in with a list of things and said, like, I'm taking the job if we can do this. And that list was inspired by the Triangle Fire. The one thing that she didn't get, which we're still trying to get in the U.S., which you guys have here, which you should be grateful for, and we're envious of, is healthcare, universal healthcare. But everything else she got. And it was Triangle that really steeled her determination.
Right before 1911 and the fire, if I'm not mistaken, there was the uprising of the 20,000. That and other issues cater to the behavior of the factory owner. And the 20,000, you teach labor. Can you talk about the significance for that labor organizing event, huge event for the memorial? And
yeah, so the industry was brutal, right? I mean, it really extracted every ounce of productivity from the workers. Days were really long, pay was really low, and they worked, 6 days a week, and if they complained, they were told, you don't like it, don't come back. And so in 1909, and that actually wasn't even the first strike, there was a strike at Triangle in 1908, a wildcat strike, which is a strike called, I don't know, probably everybody here knows, but if it's not called officially by a union, it's a wildcat strike. And there was a strike in 1908. It lasted just a few days, but this was like everything else, like the Memorial Project, like everything. There was a ton of organizing, right? So even before 1908, there were efforts to organize in the industry. Clara Lemlich, Rose Schneiderman, garment workers, some of whom worked at Triangle and then went on to become union organizers, just kept really plugging away at really getting the workers to see that they could, if they joined together, they could face, the bosses and win. And so in 1909 they did. They walked out. It was, again, spawned by an incident at Triangle, and 20,000 of them, women in the industry, walked out, mostly Jewish immigrant workers. And it was amazing. It was profound. They won at most of the factories. They did not win at Triangle. The owners held out, Max Planck and Isaac Harris, and wouldn't allow unionization and did not, up their safety game. And the fire was, what happened as a result of that. But it changed their lives. That's, when workers generally get together and organize and strike and win, even if they don't win, if they get together and organize and strike and feel their power, they're never the same. And these workers, many of the organizers of the strike went on to continue organizing, so it really revolutionized the industry.
I liked it a lot that you talked about the present and also the future, and let's stay with that for a little while. I remember when I saw it and was finally completed. It was a rainy day, it was early in that area, and then the garbage was being collected. And there was some problem with the truck. So the people working there in their neon kind of overalls came and said, "What is this?" So clearly they did not come because they already knew. They came and you gradually find out what it is, because you have these reverse laser cut names. At first you are surprised. Where do the names come from? They're up in the air, and at the same time they're on this glass stone wall. So, and they walked around and looked up and then read the plaque and so on. So it is a very interactive thing that teaches people for the future as well. And maybe this is the best part of it, since conditions are coming back.
Alas. Yeah, one of my favorite stories, so we were holding the dedication ceremony, and we found out that as soon as the ceremony was over, students at NYU were going to rally at the memorial against sweatshops, against New York University selling clothing, athletic wear that was made by sweated labor. And so we thought, bingo, this is it. This is what this memorial was built for. And so it's both people who know about it and want to use it as a rallying, as a site to rally, and people who just stumble upon it and are really moved by it. And that's a terrific feeling. There's a lot of research, not a lot, but there's research that shows that one of the things that inhibits people from organizing is they just don't know enough stories about workers' successes at organizing before them. They need inspiration. And so that's really what we hope that this does, is and it is. We're seeing that those Indonesian Nike workers were fantastic. I was in tears. Yeah. When that photo of them with the raised fist, I looked at Sherry, I looked at our mutual friend and said, okay, we could go home, like our work is done. Like if no one else visits the memorial, it has achieved what we set out for it to do. And of course, since then, I'm sure countless people have visited it, but it's just a really great place to be inspired.
You have clearly created a community spot for future organizing as a meeting spot, and with the archive, you kind of added, that means future research also has things to worry about. There are many historians that I see right here. I know that our time is more than up, but nevertheless, I would, if no one objects like dramatically, I would still want to have the chance for a little bit of a Q&A with you, or with you in here, or with people on YouTube, wherever they are. And I do have this little gadget, so I can get these questions, and I will make sure that I watch this thing. But while people are punching in their questions, you have the privilege of asking first. But of course, since we're on live stream, we need the microphone, and Yasmin is here. Do we have first questions or comments? Has anyone been there? Yes, Lisa Basten.
Hi. Yeah, I can do the ice breaking. Thank you so much. Well, like, you moved me to tears, for sure. You really did. It's so inspiring, and I'll take so much home from my own work. So the conference was a success. I can go home now. I'm done. It's so great, really. Thank you. Heartfelt thank you. My question is, you said, you talked about successful memorializing, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that kind of got me going, okay, so what's successful memorializing? I understand that the performance part of it and the beauty of the memorial itself, oh, that is a success in itself. Okay, so check that. But when listening to you, I thought that some of that success, in your words, and obviously that's being from a trade union movement, it will be my point of view too, would be to inspire people to actually step up, right, and to do something. And so in the last part of your the answer to the last question, you already told us about the example of the NYU students. Could you tell us a little bit more about like actual effect to like politicizing people? Because like when I look at it in one way, one could stand in front of the memorial and say, oh, all those poor girls, great story, they're dead. Now we have like work and safety regulations, and I'm sure fire regulations at NYU are better now, so done, right? What does that have to do with me in my here and now, in my political situation right here?
So that's a great question. I think that you can have all of the right techniques of memorialization, but somehow the memorialization has to meet the moment. And I think that in the US right now, and particularly in New York right now, we are at a moment where people are looking for inspiration, where working people are realizing that the heel of the boot is on their neck more than ever, that it is do or die, that it is now or never, and they are looking for stories of, to inspire them, to show them how it can be done, how it was done, and how maybe they should do it. And I think that that's what Triangle does is, you study labor history, you kind of need to be an optimist, because most of the stories are awful, they end horrifically. But Triangle's a horrific story, but people fought back and they won. I mean, the closest thing we ever had to social democracy in the US is the legacy of Triangle. And I do think that because of the moment that we're in right now, this message resonates more powerfully than it would have 20 years ago, maybe even 20 years from now. I don't know if that answers your question, but
There's a question here.
Hello, thank you very much. I really appreciated learning more about the Triangle Fire and how you developed the memorial. But as you were speaking, I was trying to think about memorializing or commemorating and remembering labor in the United States in general. And your memorial commemorates really 15 minutes of the whole Triangle factory. And I compare it to, say, Lowell, Massachusetts, where there's the whole mills are there. You're brought through, you learn about how people labored there, and you hear stories, both positive for the girls that work there as well as negative. And how do you see the relationship between telling the story of the actual work they did versus the tragedy?
So a dear friend, also a scholarly collaborator, was one of the leaders of the Lawrence Bread and Roses Strike commemoration, and he teaches at Lowell and is very active in the work that goes on. He's a great public historian, Bob Ferrant. And yeah, you're right. Like, we tell a 15-minute story, and they tell a story of decades. They're both important stories, right? So they're both stories about, essentially the same struggle. And I think they speak to one another, because what happened at Triangle then inspired workers in Massachusetts. The Lawrence strike, which I know isn't at Lowell, but it is connected to that whole history of that region, right? Those workers signed up with the IWW and struck and were militant because they looked at Triangle and said, yo, like, this is what happens when you don't stand up for yourself. No one's going to stand up for us if we don't stand up for ourselves. So I think that you can make those kinds of connections, and we do. I talk about what happened in New England as a result of what they learned from the experience at Triangle. They talk about Triangle, like, there's a dialogue that goes back and forth between us and them, because these stories are all connected. And much of what we know about Lowell is about the women workers at Lowell. I mean, one of the threads that connects them, right, is the importance of women in the labor movement, which often gets overlooked. I love my labor compadres, but it is a male-dominated movement still. In the history, it tends to be male-dominated, and these are stories that break through that. And sometimes, the tragedies are really compelling, and then they inspire you to look at the other stories.
Gustav Hahn?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate very much your presentation. And isn't there even a much more general lesson in that when you talked about the inspirational power of stories than just for memorizing? Donald Trump and J.D. Vance also told stories recently about migrants eating pets in Oklahoma City. These stories were provingly wrong, but they inspired people in the political fight to vote obviously for them, because they wanted to, and they knew that these stories were wrong, but they were really strategically placed stories to inspire people in their political direction. And what you're teaching us is certainly tell true stories to inspire people. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and can I tell you, some of the people who are most convinced by these stories are the children and grandchildren of immigrants. So, like, I'm, Italian American, and a lot of the people who buy into this stuff are boomer Italian Americans, and that really breaks my heart. And one of the things that I try to do with the Triangle story is to break through that. And I've given, again, countless talks to organizations of older people, particularly when I have Italian American audiences, and say, like, who in your family worked in the garment industry? This is your story. This is what they did to our people when we were the recent arrivals. Now we need to think about what's happening to the new arrivals here today. And I did a talk at a retirement community a couple of years ago, and this woman turned around to me afterwards and said she was not buying the false narratives, but she was so depressed that other people were. And she said to me, I was so depressed before your talk, and don't get me wrong, it was a terrible thing that happened, but then when you talked about what happened afterwards, it dawned on me, solidarity and collective action is the only way we're going to move forward through this thing. You've inspired me. I'm going to look into getting involved with some groups. I think that's the lesson of Triangle. We tell the story, then we say to people, like, you can't fix this alone, right? You can't break through this narrative alone. Join with other people and tell the story and do the work, and that's why I loved your opening comments about things like solidarity and community, and because that's the only way to break through.
Thank you. We have a question by Charlotte Lerck, and then I have one more here, and since we are way into our coffee break, then we carry on the conversation then. Charlotte Lerck first.
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I've read about this memorial. I haven't had a chance to see it for real yet, but I hope to do so soon. My question relates a little bit to two parts of the process that you've described. So, but the overall question is if you had any pushback or any attempts to co-opt your commitment from sort of the industry side. I've researched a few other labor memorials and the stories, and that, for example, in the 1919 memorial in Winnipeg, where there was attempts by the steel industry to co-opt the process. And I wondered specifically, as we were trying to get money, if you ever encountered an attempt, how you dealt with that. And also, after the opening of the memorial, you've described how it worked as an inspiration in the way you intended, but have you had examples where it has been sort of, because sometimes memorials can also sort of be considered a kind of closure moment, so that, oh, now we've got the memorial, now this is kind of, we can put a check to that. Have you had any of those experiences, and how did you deal with those?
So, in answer to the first part, no. We had a few entities, like I was eating dinner with Lisa, with another mutual friend. We never met until today, but we found out we have all these mutual friends. It's a really small world, folks, especially when you do labor stuff. So we were having dinner, and someone overheard us talking about this and said, I'd like to donate. And it turned out that they were a manufacturer in Bangladesh, and what they wanted to do was donate to kind of, give a good name to their enterprise so that I guess they would feel good about themselves. And what we did was everybody who wanted to donate, we would do some research and we would push a little bit, and we would talk to them about it, and then eventually they would back out. Because I think it became clear that if they donated, that their labor practices were going to come under scrutiny, and they didn't want that. So no, we really, in the end, I even had the Players Association, the NFL, a few entities that, some backed out just because they just decided maybe it wasn't for them, but others, like this garment manufacturer or other fashion companies who initially were interested, people just didn't want their labor practices scrutinized. So because garment manufacturing is an industry that still, we still need clothes and somebody's still got to make them, you can still scrutinize their practices, and people don't want that. And in answer to the second, no. That hasn't happened either. People haven't said, oh, this is done, we're done. And partly it's because of the annual commemoration that happens. So we don't just remember the triangle at the commemoration. We actually talk to like Starbucks workers or deliveristas, delivery workers, taxi workers, workers from outside the U.S., and they tell their stories and they talk about, or garment workers in Bangladesh, Kalpona Akhtar, the Nike workers, and they talk about how for them it's 1911. So that triangle isn't just, you know, in the US now, it's around the world, and it's not just 1911, it's now. And I think that that active commemoration, in addition to the memorial itself, and the inscription on the memorial, which makes it very clear that this is still happening, it's a hard narrative to co-opt because of how we've framed it and how it's still an active site.
I think that really answers the question that I have on Slido, and the question was, could you talk about your relation to practices like union organizing today in other kind of unions? So I hope that answers it. If not, send an email and I'll forward it. Since we are again way into the coffee break, at least the coffee break here on YouTube, I do hope you have a coffee break here as well, but I also hope you come back at 6 for our next YouTube keynote event. For us, it's coffee's waiting outside. We will be back in, well, 15 minutes. And before thanking Anne Trasciatti, let me just show you the book of the dedication, October 11th, 2023. It really is beautiful memorial and worthwhile a visit, as is the rest of New York City. So thank you, Anne, for coming, and thank you all.
Thank you. I don't think the mic's on. If you do come to the memorial, send me an email. If I can make it, I'll come and meet you at the site.